Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Chris Rosini, our co-host. Chris, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Very good. Today, Chris, we want to talk about the issue of blowback. The issue of blowback is somehow connected to some of the things I've said in politics because it can be a little bit controversial and people look at it differently. But it's a very real thing, and the word actually was created by the CIA and warned against. You know, if you did some things in foreign policy and they found out what we were doing to them, watch out. There may be some retaliation, which is, you know, you don't have to be a genius to figure that out. That's just normal common sense. And I think of the first big issue that the CIA talked about on blowback had to do with what happened in 1953 when our CIA and the British government got together to overthrow Mossadegh, an elected leader of Iran, and he was kicked out. And he was kicked out, and the Shah was put in, and he ran a ruthless group of people, and they lasted up until 1979. By that time, nobody remembered 1953. But guess what happened in 1979? The very, very radical groups took over, and there's been a problem ever since. What have the American people thought about this? They don't even remember 1953. It's not even taught to it. So I think, Chris, that's a good place for us to just sort of generally look at what blowback is all about. And so often, you know, the consequence, you know, it's an unintended consequence. And most of the time, it doesn't calm people down. It accelerates the problems. If we commit an atrocious act, they retaliate, it doesn't get better. And unfortunately, sometimes not only is it tit for tat, but as much as, you know, even leading to militarism and military conflict, which is the reason why this is a very serious problem to deal with.
Yes, and military actions to most Americans, if they're even aware of it, is just, it's out of sight and out of mind. It's stuff that happens outside the United States. And for most people, it's just easy to ignore. You don't see it, you don't hear about it. But when retaliation comes, because these are human beings that you're attacking and they seek revenge, it comes as a major shock. You know, we're sitting here in the United States enjoying our lives, and all of a sudden somebody attacks us, and it's shocking. And the government tries to pacify everybody. Oh, they just hate us for our freedoms, which is a total, it's a total disrespect to the intelligence of the American people, but that's the way it is.
Right.
But that's how blowback normally is understood, but we're going to talk about how it is in other areas of our life. Let's start with the drug war, Dr. Paul. What do you think there?
Well, actually, the drug war is a good example of blowback, and usually that term isn't used in that regard. But the drug war was started because there were drug warriors out there, and drugs were bad for us. Just like there was probably a 100-year effort in the United States to ban alcohol, and it was finally achieved by changing the Constitution, and that turned out to be a disaster. The quality of the alcohol deteriorated, crimes accelerated, people still drank alcohol, and the blowback was horrendous. And finally, the American people woke up and said, this is ridiculous. So they repealed the prohibition of alcohol. And this is what we're doing now with drugs. I mean, the downside of the drug use, it brings different groups together. Evangelicals who think drugs are bad, and I agree. I think they're horrible. I think they're very dangerous, and it's a good reason why the government shouldn't pretend that they know what's going on. But what happens, though, is the coalitions are a little bit weird. The drug dealers work with the evangelicals to keep them illegal because they both think they're doing what they're supposed to do. But pharmaceutical companies don't like the drugs because it competes with their potent drugs, and maybe marijuana, a safer drug, would be useful. So they have to make sure that is not involved. Private prisons actually lobby for this too because they're in the business of having prisoners. So if you subsidize something, you get more of them, so it is good. And guess what? We have more prisoners than anybody else. We don't have the biggest population in the world, but we have more prisoners than even China. And we're supposed to be the freest country, which means that we should, have the least amount of rules and regulations on our personal lifestyle. But that isn't the case. So I would say that we should admit that the drug war is a total failure. One of the most atrocious consequences of the drug war, it has facilitated those individuals who want to discriminate. The racism that is involved with the enforcement of laws, you hear it every day that, minorities are stopped on the street and they don't have this same type of protection that others do. You can read about white business people who are addicted to codeine and hard drugs, and they don't suffer the same consequence of it. So it's sort of a consequence, social consequence, but it's also used for people who would like to have an excuse to practice their racism. So I think the drug laws have been terrible, as making the racial conflicts much worse. So I think there's a pretty good argument that says that we ought to, just get rid of the drug war. Just as in the foreign policy, we should say, why don't we quit interfering the internal affairs of other nations, picking sides in all these wars? That is one of the main reasons we have blowback. People get sick and tired of our picking sides because probably both sides have their own problems, and we had no business doing it. So I think that the less involvement we have and the more trust we have in the people doesn't make the people perfect, but it makes the solution to these problems much different. Let the people in a particular country, let the Koreans decide who should be their leader and what should happen, and the same way around the world, rather than us getting involved, whether it's foreign policy or in social policy like the drug issue.
Yes, and it's natural. It's a part of our nature that we don't want to be forced to do anything by a human being, just by another human being. We just innately think, who are they to tell us what to do? And drugs it's a victimless thing. It's your own decision about yourself. So immediately when there's a victimless crime, a million workarounds pop up in what's comically called the black market, which is really just the free market, people doing what they would do without, another person telling them they can't. And the same applies when an authority says, don't read this book. What happens to the sales of that book? They skyrocket. Yeah. There's nothing better than having somebody tell you, don't read this book. And you end up getting it for free as a PDF. And maybe you weren't going to read it before, but now you make sure that you read it. So it's just a natural thing. And when government comes in and creates laws for victimless crimes, the blowback starts immediately.
And I mentioned this idea of having alliances to make drugs illegal, and it's sort of weird. Fundamentalists ally themselves. They don't do it, conscientiously, at least they claim, but they'll work with the drug dealers who want these laws. But the alliances that are formed in foreign policy are also a little bit weird too, and brings about bad things. Because if we align ourselves with the Mujahideen, which we have, and the Mujahideen becomes the Taliban, and then they turn against us, it's this alliance with evildoers that then invites these problems. You just can't use somebody to fight our battles, and of course we have that going on in Syria. We work with the radicals in Syria to do our bidding and fight our battles because our goal was to get rid of Assad. So that is a policy that has ramification, unintended consequences, and really blowback because it actually injured us. The other area, and this sort of relates a little bit to the laws, similar to the laws on drugs, will be the sanctions that we put on people, because we think other countries should behave differently and better and do what we tell them. And if they don't, we offer them two choices. Do what we tell you, or we will bomb you and put sanctions on you. And sanctions are are deadly. They are acts of war. And right now there's this big argument and struggle on sanctions on Iran. I thought it was interesting. We've talked a lot on this program about Iran. And of course, everybody knows that Trump got out of that agreement to let Iran, enter the international community. But what they have done is they have now said, since we left and sort of put a damper on the alliance, Europeans are going one way. But Trump said yesterday, we can't let the Iranians off the hook. We still have to do the inspections that they agreed to under that agreement. And I think, isn't this so arrogant? And why people, we blow up the whole thing and walk away from it, but we do need to keep the inspection. So whether it's sanctions or whether it's having these alliances, to fight our battles, this stuff all backfires. This is why, non-intervention per se, whether it's in foreign policy, dealing with foreign nations or dealing with our citizens in this country, and dealing with non-violent criminals, and trying to make the difference on, non-aggressive activity, where you don't have to endorse or criticize or condemn what people do with their liberties if it doesn't hurt anybody else. And what's just so hard for some of the do-gooders are saying, you mean let the people decide what's good for them? Let them read what they want? Now there's this big attack on monitoring languages and the words we use. So it's this obsession that people are all idiots, they can't handle any liberty, and only the cultural Marxists who care about utopia and making the world a better place, we have to obey their rules. So all they do is, of course, make things much worse with this pretense and this, this pretense that is sold to the people. We're going to make your life better. And of course, Chris, we also know this is involved in how the regulations come about in this country, because I think it applies there as well.
Oh, yes. Government has no business intervening in the economy. I know that may be shocking to people, but the moment that they get involved and start passing laws that benefit one company over another, the floodgates open and everybody wants a piece of the action. And the politicians love it because they get this sense of importance. They become the belle of the ball. The one CEO says, if you pass this law, I'll give you a nice, cushy job when you're done being a congressman, come the revolving door. Another CEO says, I'll give you $200,000 for a speech after your term is over. And the corruption just mushrooms. So the government has no business passing laws to benefit one company over another. And once that happens, government influence becomes the game. Instead of satisfying customers, your primary importance is to get that politician. And that's the blowback of government intervention in the economy.
Yeah, and I think you're touching on what is very important is those people who get to write the regulations are the ones who get the attention of the politicians and pay the money. Because if there's going to be banking regulations written, believe me, the big banks are involved. It's sort of like saying banks aren't involved with the Federal Reserve, are they? They're very much involved. What about a drug company? They're very, very powerful, and they have a great deal of influence. They pushed, medical health, prescription program, health program very heavily because they had a benefit. The big is always against the small. Big companies, and I've heard them even admit it. A big company does have the advantage because they can handle it. They have more attorneys, they have more money, and they can adapt to regulations where the newcomer, the one who's challenging the bigger company, they can't do it as well. So that is very, very well known, and the regulations. One thing that Mises said about regulations is if a country chooses to put a regulation on something, that it inevitably will create two problems, and you need two more regulation. And then, of course, the thing snowballs, and we're there. I mean, just think of the thousands and thousands of pages. Now, I know there's been a lot of talk, and there's been maybe a step or two in the right direction with this administration, but believe me, until we get a new philosophy of government, the Federal Register with all these regulations, it's not going to disappear and go away. They're going to continue to be written. If they're not written in one area, they'll be written in another area. So I think that's a very serious problem. But close to this, on things not working out as they plan, just think of the monetary mischief that goes on, all the good things that will come with central banking. And now, there was a time 100 plus years ago, central banking was rare. But in the last 100 years, in the progressive era, everybody has to have a central bank. And of course, what has it led up to? So I would say there's probably some blowback we can anticipate from this foolish Federal Reserve System and central banking.
Yes, and Dr. Paul, for me to finish, I'm going to talk about a man named Lao Tzu. This was hundreds of years before Christ, who Murray Rothbard called the first libertarian intellectual, Lao Tzu. And he said it's so simple that the more laws that are created, the more criminals are created. A free society needs very, very few laws. Don't harm another person or their property. Don't defraud them. If you tell them one thing, come through. Don't break a contract. But once government ventures out of that, it's tyranny. And once that snowball begins, it turns into an avalanche. Just this week, we saw in California, now if you want to build a new house, you have to put solar panels on. Well, isn't that great for the solar panel companies? Everybody's forced to buy your product. These are the 1,000 cuts, the million cuts that happen over time. And at some point, things have to, the ideas have to change, and the proper role of government has to be reestablished.
Very good. And the solar panel is a perfect example of an intention to help people. It's environmentally pure. You won't have to burn hydrocarbons. They never mention the fact that maybe natural gas might not be too dangerous, or that nuclear energy sometimes is very cheap and clean. But no, they will do this for environmental reasons. But one of the things they're contending with in California is there's a tremendous difference between rich and poor. There's a lot of money in California, and they're very wealthy, and that's why they have more inflation, and that's why average people, even people with jobs, can't afford a house or rent, and they're out on the streets. So there's homelessness over there. So they're treating it by adding $8,000, $9,000 onto a house, because they have to have these solar panels. And they never stop. They never stop. And some people say, well, maybe they'd like to see more people leaving California. They're just poor people anyway. But of course, they're the giants who really care about poor people. And that's why they're inviting every poor person of the world to come into California, so that they can look and see how California is run. And then maybe they'll leave and go to some other state to live in. But it is so bad that people can't see this, and it's bad economic policy, bad political understanding, and it goes back to this one principle of who gets to initiate aggression. And it's been accepted that government can do it, they're allowed to, they're different than people, but we as individuals aren't allowed, which is proper. We can't initiate aggression, but we accept this idea that government can, and that's where the problem comes. Whether it's initiating aggression in the foreign affairs, if it's in the economic sphere, or in the social area. And this whole idea that we can mandate, dictate, and say that we know what is best, and that people are not smart enough. Literally, I've had members of Congress tell me, when I would challenge them politely, that, why are you doing this? You know, this is not technically correct, or you're interfering in their privacy. They said, yeah, but they're stupid. They're stupid people, and they won't take care of themselves. They won't get educated. They won't have this, and they really believe that, and they see them as the saviors of the universe, because they're smarter and they're more willing to have a fair society and distribute the wealth better. Because look at the distribution of wealth today. It's so bad. That's that capitalism that you guys believe in, free markets and private property right. And so therefore they concoct it. But behind the scenes, there's the ulterior motives of the cultural Marxists, who would like to bring about this utopia where they're in charge, based on the assumption that individuals are not very important, they don't know how to take care of themselves, and that if you have smart people in charge, then the George Soroses of the world will make the world a much better place place to live. And what they're doing is they're turning it into a horror state. And we're seeing it, and this effort right now to control language, I mean, on the internet, and what's happening in other countries, if you say certain words or promote certain things, you can actually go to prison. And I just can't believe that's coming about once again. And yet, I think the job that all of us have that know and understand this in our best way possible, and everybody has a responsibility, and everybody can figure out what they can do to try to explain to people the stupidity of what's happening, whether it's in the monetary policy or the foreign policy. This whole idea that you can help poor people by running up debt. Debt is not bad, and then passing the money out and just create the money, and wealth will be accumulated. Nobody's ever proven that by creating new digits, new monetary digits, that people are wealthier. You have to have freedom to do that. Even just creating more gold in the world doesn't create more wealth. You have to have freedom, and you have to have people have incentives, and you have to have people willing to work. That is what you need. But that is what we're losing, and that's why we're facing a major crisis. But the best thing I can say to keep my hopes up is that things are changing. People do understand this. In spite of what we see on the horizon, some of the things that are happening in our universities, I think there's still a lot of people who know and love liberty and are sick and tired of the last 100 years of this radical progressivism. I think it was one of the reasons that Trump was elected. I don't think that people should be too complacent and think that we have arrived, but I think some of the reasons that people were disgusted with what we had, it was the reason that an individual like Trump got elected. But our goal is to hold their feet to the fire and try to explain to them what a free society is all about and what the non-aggression principle is all about. If that is the case, I am sure we can move in the direction of greater peace and prosperity for the entire world. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.